Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our session here. My name's Colin Brown. I'm from Haud. Haud, yes. It's Gaelic for stop, so you've got it now, right? And I'm joined by some great people in the industry. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself,
Sure.
Surash.
Hi everyone, Surash Patel, VP from Telesign, been in the industry more years than I care to mention. Great to be here and talk about digital identity and fraud.
Hi everybody, name's Mark Harvey, co-founder at Sekura ID, along with, Surash, been around, hence the grey hair. But yeah, welcome.
And that's...
The leader of the pack.
It was pretty good, right? It's been great today. I think it's been fantastic how we've seen this discussion move from governmental identity management solutions, moving through into monetization, verification and authentication solutions, and the challenges with that, right? But really, we're moving into this space. It's really interesting. But I think the big thing that's really needs to be asked is, well, where's the money going to come from, right? Where's the money going to come from to feed, build, deploy, propagate, right? All of these different vendors, right, that are in this current ecosystem at this moment. And I think that's really, really interesting from when we see companies that we've talked about here about seamless 2FA. Where does that leave the message aggregator, right? Where are they in this ecosystem? Where are they in this new world of identity, right? And I think what's really interesting about this whole thing, and it's really only slightly been touched on, is the fact that it's fraud. The only reason we need digital identity, verification and authentication is because of the ginormous fraud around the world, right? That we have not been able to control historically. So what gives us this idea that we are going to be able to control it in the future? How are we going to control it in the future? How are we going to monetize it in the future? And who's going to pay it? So I'm really hoping that Surash and Mark can answer those questions for us.
Well, I thought they were going to do. Okay.
So talking about where fraud is endemic in the environment for multifaceted technologies from 2FA on SMS, on OTT, on RCS, to biometrics, to blockchain tokens. They're offering, we're hearing that they're offering more to protect the consumer and the enterprise. But how do we see this technology impact on the business model? I'd like to ask you, Mark, who is it that we see is going to be taking the ownership of these models?
There's nothing worse than being asked the first question. Look, when I look around the room, we've got absolutely everybody here that's able to solve the problem, right? And we talk about working together, we talk about building trust, but actually we're all enemies in here, right? I look at Mr. Lunn and Mr. Page and so on and so forth. We drink coffee, we break bread, but actually as soon as we leave the building, we're at war together, right? And that's the first challenge that we need to overcome. We're friends, right? It's
Of course. Yeah.
I'm not going to pick on you in case you punch me hard. But so in terms of who's going to own it, I don't know yet is the actual answer. I think first of all, we need to learn to collaborate. I think the work, I can see Helen at the back, the work that the GSMA are doing continues to be good. But when it comes to then the commercial point that you bring up, Colin, it falls over.
Yeah.
Right. So do I have the answer? No. Do we need to collaborate? Yes. Do we need to become proper friends, work together against the criminals and the bad people? 100%.
That's great, Mark. And Surash, let me sort of throw it down to the side and going back on some of the things that we've seen today, right? But are we really just at risk of making it just too complicated for the consumer? Right? I mean, is it a text message? Is it a seamless 2FA? Is it I've got to log in? Is it passwordless? I've got to open another app? I mean, we talk about taking the ownership of it, right? But are we really making it so difficult for our customers out there?
A great question, and obviously a difficult one. So how we make it more... I'm quite fortunate. I guess most people in the world, we see a global landscape. Global landscape means that there is different people out there with different sensitivities, different digital experience, and different devices and different infrastructures. So from that perspective, I think there's always going to be a spectrum of different kinds of capabilities and different ways to log on, because it's going to be use case dependent. In some instances, you'll find, we work on one side with social media providers, social media networks, where there is no monthly subscription. In these instances, they want consumers to come on board as quickly as possible with as little friction as possible, because I think, someone said it earlier, if there's no charges, then you're the product, right? You're the one being sold. So from that perspective, we've got to make it simple, because some brands want that, and that's how they monetize, right the way through to the other side of the value chain that I know we've spoken about today, where you want to be super, super, super secure, because it is going to be financial services, it's going to be banking, it's going to be all of your professional and your personal information if it's healthcare apps. So I don't think we're going to get away with the fact that we need a different range of things. And you say, where's the money? But, it's all based upon the business model of the firm that's running the service for the consumer. That's going to dictate how much risk they want to put in that onboarding or that interaction stage, because if they can afford to put in a more complicated model, they will absolutely do so. Brands like Telesign, like Sekura, people in the room, we know this, right? We're not first timers here, right? We know that we sell on return on investment. And if we can demonstrate, to your point, that there's fraud going on and we can impact that fraud in some way, we try to get our services to pay for themselves by reducing that fraud. So it's not a straightforward answer. Yes, it is going to be complicated. And I think that complexity will be, in some instances, taken care of a brand, because they still want you to get on board and use the services. So if they start to see their onboarding rates drop off significantly, my gosh, they will act. And we've all seen guest checkout, right? That's the bane of retailers' lives. They've let the genie out of the bottle, haven't they? Guest checkout, go and buy what you want as quickly as you want. And now I was at the Merchant Risk Council conference the other day. The biggest issue they're facing is first-party fraud. Surprise, surprise, right? But it's always a balance. If companies can afford to take a certain level of risk and they still are profitable, they will do that. But come to the consumer's perspective, what do we want? We do want to not to share too much detail. We want more ownership of our data. We certainly don't want to be carrying our passport around and sending it and getting it faxed and photocopied. So absolutely, we want it simpler. But in the trust index and surveys we do, the consumers are saying, oh, no, we want the brand to look after us. It should be the brand's responsibility. So there's got to be some shift at some stage where we as consumers have to take, you need to want to take more responsibility, but it can't be because we're being defrauded. There has to be some other kind of education, I think.
But when we look at fraud, right, and we look at this whole identity management, right, someone has to pay for it, right? Someone has to put the metal in the ground, or put the cloud in the sky, right, or put the app on the phone, right, or integrate into all these APIs, right? So is it the brand that's going to pay for it? But when we look at it, most of our fraud that we're seeing, right, and if I go back to what we were saying at the break, Mark, we're only seeing 18% of the 1.4 billion in the UK was through telecommunications, although it had 44% of the actual impact financially, right? So it might have only been small, but that call to action fraud is so immense, right? So tell me, in the sense from Sekura's perspective, how do you fix that, right, from a seamless transactional perspective? Right?
So look, I'm going to answer the question, but maybe in a slightly different way. So I think when you look at the ecosystem today, APP fraud last year, I think the reports were something like 500 million, right, was lost. We work with MNOs all over the world, so I'm not berating them here, but it's just what it is. Unfortunately, some of them, not all of them, look at the cost and go, wow, the consumer's lost 500 million. We've got a service that can fix that. Or we can make 400 million.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't stack up. It doesn't add up. So we spoke about it and heard about it a few times today, where pricing and how things are priced, either database access, service access, whatever it is, we need to understand what's the full ecosystem chain look like. And to your point, Colin, who pays?
Yeah.
Right? The consumer will end up paying. Now, I'd like to maybe turn the model on its head and ask the audience, if we said, okay, we're going to add £5 or $5 to your mobile phone bill every single month, but every time you do an online transaction, we're going to do a SIM swap. Every time you do any form of KYC, we're going to use the telco KYC information. But it's inclusive. How many people would be prepared to pay that, knowing that they're kept safe with absolutely every single digital transaction? Quick show of hands. £5 a month? You wouldn't? No? Crazy, I would. But then the thing is, people go no, but then when they lose their money, they want to point the finger at somebody. Right? Oh, but it wasn't me. Right? But they're not willing to pay something to protect themselves. But they insure their car, they insure their house, they insure other things. They don't want to insure their digital identity, because that's ultimately where it's going.
I think that's fantastic. But Surash, let me go a different route here, right?
Okay.
And let me ask you, right, what happens if it suddenly becomes regulated? What
People
happens,
will have to pay £5.
right, if it suddenly has to become regulated in our countries for our operators and our banks to pay for an ecosystem of solutions that actually fix this? What do you think it's going to do? You think it's going to be positive or negative to this?
You'd have to hope it would be positive, right? You'd have to hope that, because that's why we have government, is to make a positive impact to our lives. So you'd have to hope it would be positive. I draw some reference to what's been happening on things like, things like the payment service directives that are coming out, or the anti-money laundering. And when we look at that, and we look at the amount of fraud on one side, which I think whatever global fraud is now, it's tens of billions, or something like that, right? 20, 30 billion, according to which report you read. And then you look at and I'll take Europe, for instance, the amount of fines that Europe is giving out for breach of GDPR, anti-money laundering, that's in the probably sub 10 billion.
Yeah.
Whereas fraud is like 30, 40. So we have regulation, and that doesn't seem to be stopping fraud. And the reason for that, I think, is that regulation seems to be going after the brands to make sure that there's not anti-money laundering going on, and obviously stopping all of the bad actors when it comes to those kind of things. But no one's actually got the consumer's benefit in mind. So regulation right now, I think, hasn't really been tackling it. Indirectly, for sure, but directly, no. So I'd like to think that with regulation, we saw the UK, the online safety bill, right? It wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. And in that, it talked about sharing information, right? It said branches, lots of those organizations, as with other people in this room, they're our customers. And if you said, to one social media, you're willing to share your information with another, or if it's a marketplace, share bad actors across industry, it doesn't happen. So then we come back to the models. Only us, people in this room who work across industries, we gather information from our customers with implicit consent, working with the operators, and out of that we build models. And those models are cross-functional. I know, for instance, I would tune a model for a different country, a different use case, even for a different brand, working with them to get their labeled data and then tune the model and make it more tuned to what they want. So yeah, I think it would make an impact, probably not as much as we would hope, but for the time being, we all, as part of the value chain, because of the fact we work across many different industries and customers, we're able to build models that are probably more effective than other stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
And
I
you see
think that
as
is
well, right?
absolutely. I think it's I think Mark summed it up pretty good in the sense that we're all competitors, but we actually need to come together and build an ecosystem, right, where we can collectively collaborate, right, without sharing the secrets under the sauce, right, but where we can collaborate for the better of our industry, right? Because here's the thing that I fear, right? The thing that I fear is that you're seeing things like digital wallets now coming in Europe, right? We're talking 500 million people, right? That the timelines are extremely tight, and I think there's a high propensity to failure by making that extremely tight. But I think if we can't get together, right, you know, you're going to have a government or a European Union here that's rolling out a regulation, right, that's not going to be adopted, right? The adoption between the user and the merchant is going to be incorrect, right? And I fear as though that is upon us now to really push on it, right? And I've got a question, I think, for you, Mark, on this, right? Which is, you know, I think the big thing about identity management is it's not just about the user. Why is it all about the consumer that has to identify himself? You have the consumer and the enterprise. You have the two ends of the connection that should be verified, right? And I think that's what you do quite well in Sekura. I think what I'm really interested in is you've been able to get these open gateway products out really quickly. They've pushed into the world, right? And it's the usability, it's the ease of use, right? What do you think is going to be the challenge with propagating a global identity solution, right? With regard,
as many people in the room, we travel around the world, right? The one document that is accepted everywhere is the passport. It's not questioned, right? You turn up as long as you've got a visa, if you need a visa, but you turn up, the guy or the lady looks at it and says, yeah, it kind of looks like you, and I'm going to give you a stamp and come in and do business or do whatever you want to do. My biggest concern is that we're going to have identities, digital identities, that have then got to be accepted everywhere around the world. So there's something going on with notaries at the moment here in the UK, right? At the moment, if you want something notarized, you've got to go in, physically see somebody, they put a fancy little ribbon and a stamp and all the rest of it. The UK government are going, well, we're not doing that anymore, we're going to digitize it. Now, we've recently, over the last year, launched in India, and India they like paperwork there, right? It's great. They will not accept the UK government digital notarization. So there's the first problem.
yeah.
Right? If they're not willing to accept that level, what are we going to do about the physical digital identities we're talking about? So I think the governments, rather than working in all of these silos and all of these projects, which are great, and 500 million being offered here and there and whatever, the governments actually need to come together and say, what are we all going to do collectively to accept this thing called digital identity? What is it?
So I think somebody mentioned that earlier. There needs to be that sort of certification, right? I think what we're trying to say is, I think the same thing, right? In the sense of, why do we need all of these different things, right? Which I think causes huge amounts of confusion, right? You know, and I think that's really, and I really want to talk a little bit more, Surash, and I really want to get into the question of how I believe there needs to be an ecosystem, right? Right, we're the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, right? That's our whole, right? There's CEOs, there's telcos here, there's governments here, right? If we can't really work this out, right, I think we really need to try a different form of...
Selling baked beans.
yeah, something, right? So, but how do you think we would go around that, Surash?
Wow. A global problem to fix.
Knock it out.
Right. I think if you think about the stakeholders, we have government, we have consumers, and we have brands. We need everyone to buy into the idea that there's a solution that's going to help everyone come together. If we think we've got businesses becoming registered now, we've got the Glyph thing going on with some of the colleagues in the room, registering businesses so we know that you're a person from that business and you register yourself. So there's already global registers like this being set up. But if we think from a consumer perspective, we come back, especially in this country, right, to people's privacy. And that's one of the biggest factors, I think, here. It's probably the elephant in the room. If we see who's perpetuating the fraud, it's not the good consumers.
No.
And the ones that want to carry on committing fraud are not likely to want to buy into these things as well. So how do we make sure that we bring everyone along and make it mandatory, but do it so in a way that doesn't seem like we're trying to introduce a police state? Because that's the other side of things. Is that
but if we actually think about it, right, we talk about it now, we're seeing things with the green tech, the blue tech, we're talking about verification everywhere, right? We're seeing an education program going out, right? But I think that's really important, right? You're not going to get the bad actors, right, giving all their information to you, right? But how do we then bring the good actors and tell the good actors they have to verify themselves?
Yep. And I think that's where you have to look at the services that people are consuming. If people want to consume a service, then they will, and it's bringing them value, they will register. So it's got to be as much of people buying into it, a pull as possible, as much as a push. And we've seen that. We've seen bits of the internet, go from anonymous to, yes, I know who everybody is. For instance, when it comes to logging into YouTube or Google or whatever, you have an anonymous mode, and then you have a mode where you're happy to be identified. And I think that's probably where it will start. You probably have this polarization of, I'm quite happy to be identified in this world. And in other parts of the world, you'll still see that there's some degree of ambiguity. So I think it'll be a gradual process. I don't think as soon as we try to say everyone needs to jump on board and do this. And it was interesting to see that in Bhutan, I think, was it 13% of the population, and they've got this whole thing, right? And for some reason, it might be because of literacy or geography or God knows, some of the reasons why everyone isn't on board with that. But that's almost like the perfect scenario. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and whether people really do lean into that, especially if they need and want to have digital services, which is one of the main reasons that we want to have this identity, right?
Yeah.
But I think earlier on there was a great presentation where, and apologies, I forget the lady's name, when she was talking about when you're flying and, you can check in using this wallet, you can get your car hire, you can get... Maybe we just start in one place, right? There's millions of people that are traveling on a daily basis all around the world. If all of the governments around the world said, okay, this is what we're going to start. If you want to travel from point A to B, cross country, you've got to register for this particular thing, whatever it is. And then, because that's a real use case, right? I think sometimes, when I come to events and things, we talk about all these lovely wallet ideas. What's the real use?
But there's a perfect example, right? Which is, we're talking about a paper thing, right? It's a paper passport, but it actually has to run through a digital transaction. So why don't we just have a digital passport, right? So there's one, right, as you say, right? And then within the wallet, you can add the use cases that are useful. Exactly what the team from Bhutan had done, right? But I think it's, I'm obviously conscious of the time. I just see him moving there, right?
Being shouted at.
Well, not quite yet, right? But
Everybody wants a cup of tea. I know I do.
But I think it's just, and sort of finishing up, right, is, look, if we can't get from my side, right, one, an ecosystem that actually enables us to be profitable, we're companies in the end. The telcos have to be profitable, our vendors have to be profitable, right, at a price point that doesn't hurt the consumer or the industry, right? Also at a point where we're not slicing out piece of the industry and saying, all right, thanks, Chief, we don't need you anymore, right? I think we've got maybe a good way forward. But I would like to finish with this thing, that if we sit back here in 5 years' time with digital wallets everywhere, and it's fantastic, but we still have the same level of fraud in our consumers and our customers, and our most vulnerable to society, then we may have some great use cases in digital identity, but I believe as a forum that we have failed as a group of people.
Agreed.
And on that, thank you very much.
One question. That's it.
Everybody wants tea. I told you that many times.
You're gonna have to wait till champagne and. Okay.
Tim missed out.
Jeff, ontology. You mentioned, I like the idea that you say people pay for insurance, like car insurance. So do you see a role for maybe something like a digital reputation, both for operators such as yourselves and consumers as well, about building a reputation about how safe you keep yourself or how safe you keep your customers, and then having some sort of incentives, financial incentives, regulatory incentives to reward those good actors both as consumers and as operators?
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if you think about what's the insurance company called? Vitality, right? You get your life insurance or whatever via them. They give you an app. If you run up the stairs rather than walk, or if you cycle or whatever, they give you points, and your insurance premium comes down because you're doing the right thing. It could work in a very similar way. If you're getting the right ticks on certain sites and so on and so forth, you're verifying yourself in the right way, then potentially, your digital insurance can come down. But to your point, Colin, somebody's got to pay. And ultimately, we are all paying as consumers. We just don't really know it, right? And we're not being protected in the way that we should be, given the technology that's available today. None of us should be scammed at all. The technology is already out there to protect us.
It is true, right? I mean, when you think about it, it's just frighteningly, shockingly easy to stop this, right? Because it's a call to action, right? You have to actually make the customer do something, right? Which then goes through telecommunications, right? So we could actually do things, but I think that's really interesting. But I like your idea. Actually, I might take that and use it. Right, but.
I have another question here, and then the last one will be with Michael. So, yeah.
Hi, it's Tim from XConnect. I mean, you kind of heard me talk earlier on, or if you're in here, sort of about keeping it simple and some of the basic checks. And I've got to say, one of the sort of examples we've run into, enormous amount of money flow to fraud at the enterprise level, but as a result, really, of not doing some basic checks. Very, very basic checks could be performed without any... Now, they were really identity checks. They're identity just to make sure a number exists. There's a huge amount of traffic being sent to non-existent numbers and allowing money to be siphoned out. And I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. I'm not talking about small... This is on a very, very large scale. Now, the piece that kind of reminds me of, and I just wonder on your comments here, is really... are the enterprises, because that's kind of where so many of the leaks really happen, where these issues of, or the need for identity checking really exists, rather than in the entire end-to-end chain. It's sort of at the beginning of that chain that seems to be the place that needs some attention. How do we get those enterprises almost educated to the point where they're aware of what can be done? We've talked about a whole range, and I think exactly your point earlier on, we've actually got the tools. They're there, they're ready to go. But it's, do people realise, A, that they exist, B, they should be using them, which I think is another question. And I just wonder if you might comment on that in terms of your experiences in working with end user customers.
Go on. You go first.
Thank you, Tim. Great question. I am assuming you mean onboarding consumers right at the start of the funnel, right? And, I go to forums like this. I go to forums like the Merchant Risk Council, which is all about e-commerce providers. It's funny. I think people are looking at consumer fraud when it comes to payments, and they're trying to stop payments fraud. Mm-hmm. And then when I go to other conferences where you have product managers and fraud managers, it's a completely different group of people to the people who look at payments. So it's quite interesting. You can go to a massive brand that we all work with, and you could find a completely different contract working with you for onboarding that has no conversation with the people who do payments. So trying to bring these groups of people together to say, actually, you on the payments cards could learn a lot from the fraud that's happening at onboarding and vice versa. And there's probably some tools that we should be cross-fertilizing across the ecosystem.
We've got the best kept secret.
Yeah.
And to your point, education in the market. It surprises me, to your point, you go and talk to an enterprise and a basic check, as you put it, Tim, just check the number. They're like, didn't even know you could do that. And even in today's world, some people are still not aware. So, yeah, it's quite a
I think that we have to think a little bit outside the box, right? Which is, and not our typical partners that we would sell or enable our selling to, right? So we're used to going to operators, enterprises, and doing a direct deal, right? And trying to educate them, right? Whereas we should actually be going to companies that are selling telephone systems, right? Or the call centers, right? And speaking to them and saying, look, why don't you package this with your call center application, right? You've got a fraud solution there that you can upsell, right? Because the problem we've got is we've got great technologies.
Colin, I've got competitors in the room. I've got to get out.
Right. But we've literally got such small resources at the front end of our businesses, right? That we should think outside the box a little bit, right? Think about getting other players to help us.
Okay, right. I think we're going to wind that one out. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, sir.